Hello everyone, my name is Daniel, and I'd like to share with you my experience with making rounded steps. This is something that seems straightforward, but not quite as easy as I thought it would be. I'm not a professional carpenter, I'm a do-it-yourselfer, and I decided to put in my hardwood floors and do my steps, and everything was fine until I got to the bottom 3 steps, which are rounded. I'll show you what they look like in the process of dealing with them now, and didn't really find on the internet enough information to figure out how to do this project. I was really concerned that the cut would not be perfect. I would be working with hard oak, 3/4 inch, and I just wanted to make sure that I was doing things right. Saw a lot of videos, a lot of different techniques, but none of them really explained A to Z how to do this. So I ended up talking to a few people, a few carpenters, almost hired a carpenter to do it, but then mustered up the courage to do it myself. So I'd like to go with you through the steps and tell you what I did, and you can see the final product and judge for yourself whether this is something you're...
Tools that I use for this project, and you probably are going to need a few of these, if not all of them. So beginning with here, the router. This is a tool that is critical in the final stages of your cut. It's the tool you're going to use to make that rounded cut. You're going to put your bits right up in here, and you're going to use this not only to cut that rounded cut on the oak, but also to round out the final edge of the tread. This is a very good router. It's a Makita router. I bought it used, but in very good condition, and I would strongly encourage you to buy something of quality. I had never used a router before this project, so this is something you can learn to use and very effectively. You'll probably need a sander. This is a handheld sander with a belt. You have to be careful when you take the sander to the edges not to sand out too much, but that's very useful. I didn't use it very much. I actually used this little bit more, which is just a little block of wood with some 120 grit sandpaper stapled to the block. You're going to need a carpenter's square. This is really important to have this metal straight edge. It also has measuring ability. That's really important as you do your step, but having this straight edge is very, very important for your cuts. I also used a T-square, which is this one that I have here up on the wall. You will also need a jigsaw. This is a pretty good quality one. It's a Bosch. I had never really worked with one before. I'd made a few cuts here and there, but nothing too spectacular. In fact, I didn't really like using it because of the brutishness of the cut. But I learned to use this very effectively, and to be able to get up to 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch from the edge was really important. You need some wood glue for gluing together the planks, sandpaper, 120 grit, 220 grit, and then the very fine 400 grit, really important for the final finishing smoothness of the treads. And then this clamp here that I have, this is a 36 incher, but I had 8 of these. I had 4 36 inchers and 4 24 inchers. These were really important to glue together the treads. And also a circular saw, which I don't have out here because I have it mounted underneath my table saw, but you'll probably need that as well. Maybe a little bit of acetone to clean the surface of the boards as you're gluing them together to make sure they're nice and clean. That's pretty much it. Here are the steps that we need to do. What we have here, I've done the other part of the steps, the square part, and that came out nicely with Mexican tile and oak treads, which I got at Lowe's. And these are 3/4 inch oak panels that I got at Lumber Liquidators, with some nosing that I also got at Lowe's. So we're left here with the rounded steps at the bottom. These are pretty large, or over 60 inches long. And you got these rounded ends here. Not sure if they're exactly round, like in a circle form, but they're pretty round. And the question was, well, how do we do these? So this is what we decided. The considerations that you're going to have to think about is how to deal with the fact that in a project like this, these are pretty long treads. You're talking about more than 60 inches on this one, about 75 inches here, and about 85 here. These are very big pieces of wood. and you're generally not going to find a piece of oak, or for that matter, any other wood that is going to be big enough. This is, for example, about 11.5 inches to be as wide as you need it and as long as you need it. And then that brings you to the next question. Well, if you can't get a single piece of wood to do the entire tread, then how do you cut it up? You know, how do you piece together enough wood, the right size? Do you do it in sections? Do you do them in parallel? There are a few different things that you have to solve here to ensure that you have a big enough piece of wood to cover these steps. If you notice this bottom step here, tread 1, if this were a single piece of wood, it would be a very big piece of wood. I mean, you might be able to find that big piece of wood, but that's going to cost you several $100. Whereas if you can work with a thinner piece of wood, you know, maybe a thin strip like this and another one here, and then put them together, and then add a few pieces here as well, then you could, for much cheaper, build the tread to size. And that's actually what I ended up doing. If you look right next to this section here, you have the treads that are ready to go. They've been glued together, pieced together from smaller pieces. There's the back side of one, you can see where it's been glued. This is the front side of one, and you can see how that is seamless. You don't really see where they came together. So you can make this tread as big as you want if you're careful and meticulous about putting them together. What you should consider is that when you're dealing with curves like this, these cuts are actually quite difficult to do, in the sense that if you don't get them exactly right, when you lay out this piece of wood, you're going to have problems matching the wood to the very edge, and that's going to cause severe visual problems unless you have some kind of cover. If you had a riser covering that edge, that's fine, but you're not going to be able to cover this side. This side is going to be exposed. So whatever you do here, if you don't have a perfect cut, your eyesight is going to see that immediately. So you want to make sure, whatever you do, that those cuts, especially the outer edges, are going to be perfect. Option that a few other neighbors who have similar homes with the same steps decided to go with is to not do these rounded steps, and instead have a carpenter come and either cut the steps like this or square them off. And there's one guy that even made an octagon around the sides here. That's another way to go. It's easier, less expensive, and you don't have to be as precise with the cuts. That's going to be easier to work. Is to make some templates, and I use cardboard. Just cut up some nice boards, cardboard boxes. They should be sturdy. They should be new, not all bent and used up. Cardboard may not be the best material because it is not perfectly straight, and this became a problem in the process. But for the most part, they were pretty accurate. So you want to make sure that you get them right up against the corner, right, and that they go right along the edge. So, and wherever there's a bend, like here, make sure you come around that bend and fit snug right up against the wall. Here's the other one here. A couple of details to look at. These are nice and flush up against the edge, but whenever you get some light like this, you gotta be careful there. And that's one of the problems with using cardboard. It wasn't so precise, so I had to make up for those little bits of light that we see in there. Notice the edge here is also a little bit removed from the wall. That's not good. But for the most part, the cardboard worked well. But let's go to step 2 and see what we do with these cardboard templates. More point here that's important to point out. You'll notice the templates go right up against the edge of the riser, and we're actually going to want this to come out about 1 inch beyond that edge. So we're going to make up for that when we transfer the templates to the actual wood that we'll be using. Okay, so this is the next step. We bought about a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood. I think that's a 1/2 inch. If not, it's about 15-30 seconds. I think that was the measurement, 15-30 seconds. So I took the templates that were made and laid them out, and I traced them with pencil, and also added
see here, 1 inch. Right there, we see it. 1 inch, whatever. 1 inch is the extra overhang that we're going to get on the step. So we set the template out as so, and added the inch all the way around. And then basically to make the curve, which is not a easy task, but it was not that difficult either, I simply took a pencil and the ruler, this is the carpenter's square, and I started marking in a dashed line 1 inch away from the edge, all the way up. So I did that all the way up the curve, all the way to where that ends there, and then connected the dots, and then drew it out with a pencil. So now I've drawn the step, the tread, what it's going to look like once it's done on the 15-32 ply with this template. And I've done it also for the other steps, and here they are. This is the big one, first tread at the bottom, see that, and then the smaller one is right there in the middle. That's going to be easier to cut. So now we're ready to take this ply and make our wooden templates, which are going to be far more precise, and it's going to permit us to do exactly the tread that we want in a template form. And with that template, we're going to move on to work with the actual oak treads that will be the final product. Okay, so here we are with the actual final oak that we will use. Looks like a single piece of wood, but in fact it's glued together. If you look closely, you may be able to see it, maybe not, but it's joined. Actually, the joint here was pretty good, so it's barely noticeable, but it's right around here. This is glued together, and I don't have a video of that process, but I'll show you some pictures of how that was done. This is glued right here in my home. It's not a big deal. I did it on the dining room table. Some big clamps, pressed it all together. The longer part is 2 pieces, and up here we had, I think it was 3 or 4. So here's one. You can see the line right there. The next one is around here, and the next one is right up here. So you can see, I also tried to make sure that the patterns in the wood matched up as best as possible. It was finally sanded afterward, after the overnight drying. So you can see that is the panel that we will use to cut the final tread, and I made sure that it would be about as big or bigger than the template. We're actually not going to cut using the cardboard, but rather once we cut out this piece of wood here, which is our plywood tread template, we'll put that just like this over the oak wood and cut out the final piece. Look at the back of this board, you can see where the glue has shown up. It's much more obvious where the joints are on the back side. This side was not sanded down. So that's just for reference. This was purchased at Lowe's. They were, if I'm not mistaken, about 8-foot planks of 3/4 inch oak. And if you look up here, I've got the larger piece ready to go right up here, and the smaller piece is there on the wall, also ready to go. What's to think about in this project is the overhang. I mentioned that a little bit ago. In this case, we had nosing that we got at Lowe's. Didn't have too much room to play with. Although I wanted to give it a little extra, wanted to give it a full inch of overhang beyond the front of the risers, which in this case is tile. I was a little bit afraid that because the nosing is not that wide, it's about 3.5 inches long, if I gave it too much overhang, I wouldn't have enough nosing to really get a solid, firm hold on the landing. And so I sacrificed a little bit of this distance to get a stronger hold so that when you step on this nosing, it's not going to start ungluing itself and coming off. So a little sacrifice here on the overhang.
We'll go back to a 1-inch overhang here, and that'll bring us, about there, approximately. Same with the other sides here. We'll be cutting these. What I'm going to use is a handsaw. I'm going to set up a guide to cut the straight edges, and then I'll take a jigsaw and cut right up as close to that line as possible. I'm going to try to get it right up to the line. Be very careful, take it slow, and then the very last, maybe last millimeter or half millimeter, I'll do with sand. So there we have it, the 3 templates are already drawn out. Check the curves, and what I did was I did them manually with the template, and where I felt that the curve wasn't perfect, I actually went in with a pencil and corrected the curve to make sure that it really was a nice even curve all the way around. And sometimes I judge that by stepping away and looking at the curve from afar. You can get a better sense of how good it is. Sometimes when you're right up close, it's harder to tell. Less concerned with the curve on the inside, because come back here, that inside curve right up here is going to be covered by a riser. So I have some room to play on the inside curves, no room at all to play on the outside. That curve on the outside has to be perfect. You'll notice, for example, place like maybe here, curve wasn't that great, but I fixed it up on this one here. And I'll do the jigsaw as best I can along this curve, and then with the sander and by hand sanding, I'll try to get a perfect curve in each case. Ready to cut here. Laid out the plywood on the sawhorses. Got a big weight there to hold the plywood down, because when I do these circular cuts, this is going to move, right? You don't want it to wobble, so the weight will help hold the plywood down. I'm going to cut the edges here first, cut the other round edge here, and then we'll start using either the circular saw or the table saw. I have to figure that out still, for the internal cuts. Here we are with the ply templates that have, first one has been cut out, the bigger step, using a jigsaw, and for the easier cut, a circular saw. So as you can see here, we've cut right up to the line. I used the jigsaw to bring the cuts really right up to the line. I just made sure the blade was on very firm. Sometimes the blade can be loose. Then you bring it up very close to the line and just cut very slowly all along the edge. So here we go. The curve is pretty good. It's the inside curve. There we have more wiggle room, because it will have a baseboard covering the riser part. This part has to be perfect. So this curve, as you can see, cut very nicely. Just did it very slowly, and then with the circular saw, I actually got up on the board and cut the straight edge. Didn't use a guide or anything, just went straight down. Actually, that's not correct. I did that on this side. This side was the normal edge of the board, factory cut, so that was perfect. So coming out pretty well. I'm happy with the product. I'm going back and forth, placing it in place and shaving off a millimeter here, millimeter there, and sanding just to make sure that there aren't any spaces where there is light. Ply is in. And voila. You did pretty well on the cut all the way around. And this rounded edge turned out very nicely. Happy with it. Here we placed this second tread in place, and we found that we needed to cut off a tiny bit more right here on the edge. So I'm going to take the jigsaw and shave that off just barely, about a little less than 1/4 of an inch, and that way we'll get better placement. We'll see how it fits. Second one is in. Here's the template. You can see right up against the edge there on the back. I had to shave off a little bit on this corner. That's what I was showing you guys in the other video. I also had to shave off a little bit here so that it would all fit nicely. What's most important is this curve. It's nice and round. It's sanded down. I'm going to go over it once more just to make sure there's no bends. You know, you just run your finger alongside the edge and you can feel where the bumps are. those need to be sanded out. I find that if they're too big, you can take the jigsaw if you're really careful and shave off, you know, 0.5 millimeter by moving the jigsaw just barely over the side. Make sure you don't dig into it, but it's certainly feasible with the jigsaw. It's faster than sanding, and then the very last 1/4 millimeter you do with the sanding. So here we go. Second one is a sense of achievement here. We have in the 3 plywood templates. They're all in. Curves are nice. We're still going to give it one last go over, make sure they're nice and smooth. But they're in. Main cuts are done. All sized out. Nothing left to major cut. Just final sanding to make those curves absolutely smooth and curved before we transfer these to the oak treads, the final product. We're going to router those using the template as an edge. So there we go. Cardboard templates for the treads became 3 5/32 inch plywood templates for the treads. They're ready to go. Next step is to take these templates, lay them over the prepared 3/4 inch oak, and take the router to them. So we'll get to that in a bit. So here we are in the last step before I actually cut the treads with the templates. Did a practice run, got a piece of oak, it's cut now. Basically, it was a piece of about this size, you see, and fixed that down to the template, and with top bearing router bit, which is this guy here, so that little bearing there goes right along the edge of the template and cuts into the wood. I cut out this piece of wood, all right? And then with a rounding bit, this one here, took that that one that's sticking up there. That's the round is a 3/8 size, so when you double that, you'll get the 3/4 size. I rounded both sides, so this side and the bottom side. And this is our practice run. This is what the tread is going to look like. It'll be a 3/4 inch tread that's nicely rounded out. I took a 120 grit sandpaper to that to smoothen it out, and it's pretty good. And now we're ready to move to the actual treads. Voila. Okay, so here is the practice run. I'm going to show you how I cut these treads out. So basically, we have here the template. This is the plywood template, 15 32nd inch thick template. We've sanded out, we've cut this curve out with the jigsaw, sanded it very smoothly to make sure it's very round. Then we lay the template over the oak. This is a 3/4 inch oak, practice piece. It's not the actual tread. We lay this out. We trace the curve using the plywood over the oak with a pencil, and there's our line. Now I'm going to take this and cut as close as I can to that line, and that's going to be the next bit. Clamp down the oak very firmly, and we're going to take a jigsaw now and cut along this line as close as we can get, but not all the way to the line, because the last little bit. Okay, so here we are with the jigsaw. We're going to cut right along this line. We're not going to go on the line, but about a 1/4 inch away from the line, all the way to the other side. Remember, we're going to finish the final cut with the router. We're going to make sure you're not cutting into your baseboard here. So here we go. You want to hold steady. Okay, so there we've cut, you can see about between 1/8 of an inch and a 1/4 inch from the line. You can see that even with the jigsaw, the cut is fairly smooth, but this is not our final cut. This is a rough cut just to get close to the line. We're going to take a router now. We could have done it with a router. Problem with doing it with a router is that you really make the router work by making the entire cut. This way we're going to only cut the part, a very thin part, and that's going to take the pressure off of the router so it can do a good job with, and not work.
Here we're set up with our router to make our router cut, and you see here the top bearing router bit. This is the bearing that rotates, and this is the bit that will cut the wood. Here is our template plywood, and here is the wood that we're going to cut. And if you come up, you can see we're going to shave off just this little bit here. So we want that blade just to cut this part. So if we come back down here, we can see what we want is this bearing to go along the template, and then the blade to only cut the wood. So if we come up right against it, we can measure. We can bring this down or up, and we want the bearing just above and the blade just about there. So we're gonna lock our router there, and we're ready to cut. So we're ready to start our cut. We're gonna start the blade rotation, and you can see how this blade will end up cutting just the oak, and the bearing will go right along the template. And all I have to do is push the bearing up against the template and just let it slide, okay? Ready to go?
Cut. We have a really smooth cut, and that's because our template was very smooth. So we did a good sanding job to get a nice rounded curve. You can see the curve from up on top, and that means that when the router gets to the oak, it also makes a nice rounded curve. We stopped here because our router edge, which is this edge here, touched up against the clamp and didn't allow us to go any further. The next step would be to simply take this clamp, move it down or move it back here, and then continue the cut. And now I'm going to show you how to do the round with a different bit. It's a rounding off bit that will make this edge rounded. We're going to need to remove the template and simply lock down the oak tread to do that rounding. Just cut the third and final step. Just got that little corner left to do. But as you can see, we've routed the edges with the top bearing router bit. It's nice and smooth all the way to the edge. And now we'll sand a tiny bit and do the rounding with the last bit. There we go. First step. Second shred. It's almost done. We've cut it out already to size. Used a jigsaw to get close on those curves. Used a circular saw on the long ends, and then a top bearing router bit to do these curves, which came out very nice. I'm going to take them to a little sandpaper now, but the curves look really good. And then we'll do the rounded over bit to round off this edge. So coming very well. This is the second tray. Okay, so here we are with the final routing. This is the rounding off bit. It's a bell-shaped bit that has a bearing on the bottom. We're going to adjust it so that this little tip is not touching the wood. So we come underneath and we look for the height right about there, lock that in place, and that's about exact. Well, actually, maybe adjust it a little bit more. Right there. Okay, so here we are. We're about to round off the oak 3/4 inch with a 3/8 inch rounding off bit, and we're ready to go. So let's see how this works. Okay, there we go. Nicely rounded off. Now we're going to flip this over and round off. Okay, so here we are about to do the rounding off of the opposite side. Same thing. We set the router right on the surface, ready to go. And as we come up to the edge, the bearing will touch the wood, and the cutting edge will cut the wood right at the top edge. Here we go. both sides. You can see, perhaps from the edge, it's better, how that's nicely rounded. There we go. We're still going to take some sandpaper to this because it's not perfectly smooth, although it's quite smooth. It's almost finished, but you can see it's a little bit rough. With the sandpaper, we'll just smoothen that out. Just a piece of loose sandpaper. You don't need a sand belt or anything. Just with your hand, you sand in this form. Tread number 1 is stained. 2 coats of varnish. We put on some Minwax cherry. It's looking nice. I really like how the joints ended up. They're not very visible. Looks like one piece of wood for the most part. You know, comes up in parts, but I think we did a pretty good job. All right, here's the finished product. They're not glued in yet, but they are varnished, they are polyed, they're cut perfectly to size, they fit, and they're in. Looking good. Voila. You can see the detail. On the edge, which is quite nice. And I got pretty close to the back, although that's covered by a baseboard, so it won't matter too much. That part will not be covered, so that turned out okay. So did these guys, right up to the edge. So I'm really, really happy. Curve was really nice. You can see that drop from the video. Here you can see the rounded edge came out quite nice with the top bearing router bit and the rounded bit. That was good. The top bearing one was for the original cut, and the rounding off bit, I think that was a 3/8 inch bit, really did a nice job on the rounding. The edge, and you can see the curve is quite nice on all of them. They're nice and flush right up against the wall. The template was key for that. When I went from the cardboard template to the wooden template, we were able to get a perfect fit. You can see that nice curve there, and voila, did pretty well there. Really happy with how that came out on the joining of the oak slabs. You could see the joining came out nicely too, because it's a thick grain and light color. Hard to see the unification between the two boards, which is nice. That top one is a single board, although from factory it looks like it was joined beforehand. So yeah, very happy with the final product. Another detail, I did 3 coats of poly. So after each coat, I sanded the first one with 220 grit and finished it off with a 400 grit, then polyed again, and then on the last 2 coats, so we did 3 coats in total, on the last 2, I only sanded with a 400 grit, and it came out very nicely. There we go. Just gonna do some close-up details of how we finished this project. These are the curved stair treads with Mexican Talavera tile risers. See the finish there? Basically, what we did was peel out the carpet, sand down the sub treads that were plywood. We cleared up the riser areas, which were also plywood, put on backer board. These were ones we got at Home Depot, put them up with mortar, and then laid out the tiles with a thin set mortar. After that, we grouted them, prepared the stair treads, which were a big job. We had to glue together pieces of oak board. There are videos about that. Once they were glued, they were sanded, stained and polyed, or 3 or 4 coats of stain, 3 coats of poly, and then the final detail, after we put in the treads, was to do these baseboards. And those were put in using a strip of veneer oak on MDF, which I picked up at Lowe's. They were $10 a sheet. I got 2 or 3 of these baseboards by cutting them on the table saw. And we cemented them in with contact cement. And on the rounded side, which is a harder installation, we use finishing nails. There's one little piece there that's still drying. That's why you have that sledgehammer there. Otherwise, we're done. Well, so there you have it. We finished our steps. As I've shown in the video, this is it's a long and maybe a little complicated task, but not impossible. I am not a carpenter. This is the first time I've ever done this. First time I ever used a router. First time I really ever used a jigsaw. And I had to learn along the way. I had to resolve a whole bunch of challenges. I had some help along the way. Joseph really gave me a big hand. He's a carpenter that advised me on how to use the tools that I had and which ones I needed. He also suggested the plywood templates, which were key. But this video really was done because I hadn't found anything on internet about doing these rounded steps. And the reality is, you know, it's not an easy task, but certainly something that you can do. You don't need to hire necessarily a professional to do it if you're good with your tools and with your hands and you have a little patience. This took about 2 or 3 weeks from beginning to end. And along the way, I had to explore different things to solve the problems that I ran into each step of the way. But it was a lot of fun. I'm very happy with my work. I'm happy I was able to do it myself. And I hope that this video will help others take up the challenge to do some rounded steps in their own home. Thank you much. Take care.